Welcome back. All right, we are ready for chapter 17 today in Sign of the Beaver. If you remember with chapter 16, I hope you remember because it hasn't been that long ago. Before we sit down to read each chapter, you should review what happened in the chapter before that. So like what we read, chapter 16, you should review that just so your mind is in the right spot. Okay? So today we're going to read chapter 17. Do you remember where Matt is? Where did we leave him in chapter 16? He's at the Indian village sleeping in the wigwam. Because remember, he was pooped. He had traveled that way, had just eaten that bear, which was delicious, he said. He'd never had bear before, and he really enjoyed it. But Etienne walked him to the wigwam where he slept. And so that's where we left in chapter 16. Just a couple words today. We've got mortar, which I've got a prop. This is a mortar and pestle. If you take like peppercorns, I should have brought peppercorns, and I didn't think about that. But like they're like little bitty pebbles of pepper, and you would take this and mush them up to make pepper out of it. Now I have had this mortar and pestle for probably 25 years, and I've never used it. But look, I get to show you. So they're going to talk about a mortar actually being in a tree trunk, where they took a trunk of a tree, hollowed it out, and made it into something like this, where they would take the stick, and I believe it's corn that they're grinding up, because they need large amounts of it. I'm not grinding up corn or anything, but I do have peppercorns, but I have a pepper grinder, and that's what I use to make the pepper. But anyway, a mortar and pestle, so that's a mortar. But like I said, they're using like a huge tree trunk, okay? And then wampum is what the Native Americans had used as their form of money, and a lot of times it would be shells that they would use for money in exchange. Just remember, it's different than our coins and stuff, but that's what they had originally used. Okay, so chapter 17. Let's see what happens here. Page 84. Now I'm assuming that you're ready for the day, that you have come with your teeth brushed, because you know that I'm gonna say be ready for the day. Okay, so just make sure you do that when you get up. Get yourself ready. Okay. And if not, do it. Go. Gracious. All right. Page 84. When Matt woke, the wigwam was dim, but the cracks of brightness around the door flap showed that it was daylight. By the sounds, the village was up and about. He could hear men's voices, the shouts of children, and the shrill yelping of dogs. Behind these sounds, there beat a dull, thumping rhythm. Could the Indians still be dancing? He lay looking about him at the smoke-streaked walls of woven matting, at the clutter of objects hanging here and there. Shapeless garments, cooking pots, odd-shaped bags of animal skin, bundles of dried grasses and herbs. Under the platform where he had slept was an untidy pile of baskets and rolled-up mats. From the heap of ashes in the center of the dirt floor, a wisp of smoke curled up toward the small hole in the roof. Much of it could not escape and drifted back to hang in thin clouds just above his head. Matt's throat felt tight with it, and he sat up coughing. Then he moved to the doorway, pushed back the flap, and stepped outside. So where he was sleeping almost sounds like a closet or something to me. I mean, it's a tent, it's a wigwam, but I guess it's a cone shape, I'm not sure. But it sounds just very cluttered, like there's a lot of stuff in there. As though they had been waiting, children came scuffling about him, their bright eyes curious. Remember, they're wondering, who is this white boy? They're so curious. Most of them were naked as little frogs. "Quay," he said uncertainly, sending them into a chorus of giggles. Matt was relieved to see Etienne approaching. "You sleep long time," Etienne greeted him. "Too much bear, reckon." Matt smiled shamefacedly. He still found it hard to take Etienne's sober teasing. Remember, the word reckon would never be anything Etienne would have used before. Over the heads of the children, he looked about the village. Last night, in the darkness and firelight, it had appeared mysterious and awesome. Now, under the strong sunlight, he saw that it was shabby and cluttered. There were a few bark cabins. For the most part, the wigwams were ramshackle and flimsy. On every side, from racks of untrimmed branches, hung rows of drying fish. Scattered heaps of clam shells and animal bones littered the ground. The Indians themselves had discarded the splendor of the night before. Some of them, like Etienne, wore only a breechcloth. Others faded cloth trousers and ragged blankets. The women had replaced their bright finery with skirts and vests of dingy blue cotton. Now he could see what was making that rhythmic thumping. Two women were pounding corn in a huge mortar made from a tree trunk. So can you imagine how big that is? Their arms alternately rising and falling. Others nearby were grinding in smaller mortars of hollowed stones, so probably more the size that I showed you. They took, it's a hollowed out stone. They sat close together, jabbering like blue jays, but their chatter did not for an instant interfere with the steady rhythm of their bare arms, meaning they could work just fine while they were talking. In front of another wigwam, two women were weaving baskets of rushes. As Matt and Etienne passed them, they looked up with shy smiles. All the women, Matt noticed, were hard at work. A few very old men sat smoking in front of the wigwams, and a group of boys squatted in a circle playing at some sort of game. "Where are the men?" he asked. "Gone," Etienne said. "Before sunup, my grandfather lead hunt for deer." He had brought a hunk of cornbread for each of them, and munching it, they walked through the village back to the canoe. Matt kept hanging back, looking all about him at the village. He wanted to stay longer. There were 100 questions he longed to ask. Remember, when he came last night, it was dark. So this is the first time he's seeing it in the daylight. He just has so many questions. But Etienne seemed impatient. His genial mood of the night before had vanished, so Etienne's acting kind of serious today. Without wasting emotion, he pushed the canoe into the water. A tackle of children had followed them and now stood on the bank, laughing and waving as they moved out into the river. Matt tried to find reason for Etienne's silence. "If it hadn't been for me," he asked, "would you have gone on the deer hunt with the men?" Etienne did not like the question. "Not take me," he admitted finally. "I not have gun." "Well, you're a good shoot with a bow and arrow." Etienne scowled. "That old way," he said. "Good for children. Indian hunt now with white man's gun. Someday my grandfather buy me gun. Need many beaver skins. Beaver not so many now." So he's saying he would need to use beaver skins to pay for a gun, but there's not as many beaver now, so that's hard to do. "Well, I know guns cost a lot," Matt said. "I'll have to wait a good while for another one myself." Etienne had long since heard the story of Ben's visit. Remember Ben that took the gun? Ben, darn it him. "White man can buy with money," Etienne said. "Indian not have money. One time plenty wampum. Now wampum no good to pay for gun." There was bitterness in Etienne's voice. Matt understood now why Etienne had defended the beaver dam so fiercely. Was it true that beaver were getting scarce? Matt thought of the village they had just left, how very poor it seemed, how few possessions the Indians could boast. For the first time, Matt glimpsed how it might be for them, watching their old hunting grounds taken over by white settlers and by white traders demanding more skins than the woods could provide. As they set off through the forest, he tried to think of a way to lift Etienne's gloom. So he's starting to realize maybe the white men coming in, the white settlers coming in, taking over their villages, has really negatively affected the Native Americans. "That was a mighty fine feast," he said, "and I was glad to see where you live. I'd like to go there again someday." Etienne's scowl deepened. "My grandmother not want you come to feast," he said finally. "My grandfather say you must. She say you not sleep in her house." "Oh," said Matt lamely, his own pleasure suddenly dimmed. So many things were suddenly clear to him. Why he had been left alone to sleep in the empty wigwam. Why Etienne had hurried him away so abruptly this morning. Etienne had been caught in a family argument and was annoyed about it. So the Sockness wanted Matt to come to the feast, But Sockness's wife, Etienne's grandmother, did not want him to come. She didn't even want him sleeping in her wigwam. She's like, "Ugh." "My grandmother hate all white men," Etienne said. When Matt could find nothing to answer, Etienne went on. "White man kill my mother. She go out with 2 squaw to find bark for make basket. White man come through woods and shoot with gun. My mother do them no harm. We no longer at war with white men. Just same, they kill for get scalp. White men get money for Indian scalp, even scalp of children." Now I'm going to let your mom and dad explain that to you if you want further explanation there, okay? I'm just going to keep going. Matt's indignant protest never got past his throat. He remembered that it was true, or had been a long time ago. He had heard that during the war, the Massachusetts governor had offered a bounty for Indian scalps. Etienne must have been a very small child. "My father go out on war trail," Etienne said. "He go to find white man who killed my mother. He not come back." So what do you think probably happened to him? Matt was speechless. He had never dreamed that anything like this lay behind Etienne's carefree life. He had never wondered about Etienne's parents at all, only accepted without question that the boy followed his grandfather and obeyed him. Remember how Matt had been very envious of Etienne, being like, "Oh, he gets to roam around the forest, hunt if he wants to. He's got such a carefree life." But little did he know what horrible things had happened to his parents. Just goes to show you, you never know what somebody has going on in their lives. "No wonder she hates us," he said at last. "Terrible things always happen when there's a war, on both sides. You've got to admit, Etienne, that there was a reason. The Indians did the same thing to white settlers. The white women were afraid to go outside their cabins." So it was a very challenging time. Indians and white men fighting against one another, both being scared of the other for good reason. And like Matt said, nothing ever good comes from war, or there are bad things always happen when there's war to both sides. Even if you win, there are bad things that have happened. Many people killed. "Why white men make cabins on Indian hunting grounds?" Matt had no answer for that. It was no use, he thought. The war with the French was over. The Indians and the English had made peace, but the hatred, would that ever be over? For all he and Etienne walked through the woods together, there was a wall between them that Etienne would never forget. In a sudden panic, he thought of his own mother. Was it right for his father to bring her to this place? So he's saying, of course, Etienne has some bad feelings towards white men. They killed his mother, and probably more than likely his father too, or something to his father. So Matt's thinking, gosh, is it a good idea for my father to even bring my mother and little sister and baby to this place? Maybe that's not a good idea. "Does your grandfather hate us too?" he asked. Etienne did not answer at first. Finally, he said, "My grandfather say Indian must learn to live with white man." So his grandfather's a pretty wise man. He realizes the white men are there to stay, and that the Native Americans and white both, need to learn how to get along with the other. It was not the answer Matt had hoped for, but Sockness had said he must come to the feast. In spite of the grandmother, Sockness had made him welcome. "When my father comes," he said, "I want him to know your grandfather. I think they would like each other." Etienne did not answer, and they walked on in silence. Discomforted, Matt turned his attention to the trail they were following. Presently, he recognized the unmistakable carving of a little animal cut into the bark of a tree. But when he turned to Etienne to boast of his recognition, he was silenced by the darkness in Etienne's eyes. Instead, without speaking, he studied the signs they passed. Now Matt is noticing the signs on the trees, the signs they passed, and he's pretty proud of himself for recognizing those. He marked fallen trees pointing along the path, small piles of stones, and wherever the trail seemed to vanish, he discovered on a tree the sign of the beaver. When they came out at last on a trail he knew well, He marked carefully the spot where the two trails met. Why, he thought in sudden excitement, I could actually find my way to that village. I'm sure I could. But he did not share his thought with Etienne. He knew that unless Etienne took him there, he could never go to that village again. Sockness had only invited him to the feast out of kindness, or perhaps out of fairness for his small share in killing the bear. Would he ever be given another chance? And that is the end of chapter 17. Okay, so it's cool because Matt was invited to the tribe where Etienne and Sockness lived, but he came to find out that he is really not liked, hated, as a matter of fact, by Etienne's grandmother because white men killed his mother and presumably his father too. And of course, that would just put such horrible feelings in your heart, I would think. And so Etienne, his grandmother, that would have been her daughter, of course, she just finds it hard to forgive the white men. Now, Sockness said, you know what, we're going to have to live together. The white men are here. Native Americans are here. We are going to have to learn to get along. And so he realizes that and has made peace with that fact that they need to learn to get along. But anyway, so that's how we leave it. Etienne is not a happy camper today. He didn't get to go on the hunt. He feels uneasy towards the white men too. He's has that hardness in his heart because they took his mother away from him. And I can understand that, can't you? It kind of, that would be hard to forgive, I would think. Okay, you are going to do your chapter summary on chapter 17. When we get together tomorrow, we'll be reading, not tomorrow, sorry, Wednesday. Remember, Wednesday's your quiet day. On chapter 18, we'll start on Thursday. Listen, so because we won't be getting back together before the end of the year, I had said we were going to do book reports in groups. I need to think how I'm going to handle that, but maybe be thinking of some way you can present a book report type situation. I need to figure that out. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have even said anything. I need to figure that out. And then, but we'll be doing something to kind of wrap this book up when we get to the end of it. Okay. All right. Always great to be with you guys. Have a wonderful day. And I will see you with chapter 18 on Thursday. Bye-bye.